Hey, what's going on? Ryan here with Intersection Records. Happy birthday. Happy 80th birthday to Jimmy Page. That's got to make us all feel kind of old, doesn't it? Jimmy Page is, as far as I can remember, has been the guitar god of really of the classic rock era. If you like heavier rock, he's just been there from the beginning. And it's amazing that these guys are approaching 80 and they're in their 80s. And he was recently playing some Link Ray stuff on the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, playing Rumble or whatever. It's amazing. He was born outside of London, January 9th, 1944. He says that when he was about 12, they had moved into a new home, and all of a sudden there was a guitar there. He wasn't sure where it came from, whether it was left by the previous owners or somebody had dropped it off, but there was a guitar, and he was obsessed with it. And, let's call it 1956. Elvis is out. Scotty Moore, Elvis's first lead guitar player, was an influence. James Burton, who played with Ricky Nelson and became Elvis's other guitar player, was also an influence. He met through Jeff Beck's sister, Jeff Beck, at a pretty early age too. They were childhood acquaintances and shared a love for blues music. As the 60s enter, he is playing in the Marquee Club with the Cyril Davis Band and Alexis Corner's Blues Incorporated, alongside people like Peter Green and Eric Clapton and Jeff Beck and some of his contemporaries, the Rolling Stones had already done there. He takes guitar lessons early on from fellow musician and guitar player John McLaughlin. And, really, John Gibbs discovers him in these clubs and says, hey, why don't you think about working in the studio on some records? And he goes to Decca Records and does a lot of studio stuff from like 1964 to 1966. Works on tracks by the Kinks. Works on Baby Please Don't Go by Them, fronted by Van Morrison. The Crying Game by Dave Barry. Sunshine Daydream by Donovan. A Little Help from My Friends by Joe Cocker. Shirley Bassey's Goldfinger, the title track from the James Bond movie. Heart of Stone by the Rolling Stones. Beck's Bolero by Jeff Beck. So Jeff Beck is disgruntled in the Yardbirds. When Eric Clapton was ready to leave the Yardbirds, the first suggestion in 1965 is for Jimmy Page to replace Eric Clapton in the Yardbirds. And he says, I don't want to do it. I'm too busy and too lucratively making money in the session game. Why don't you take my buddy Jeff Beck? So Jeff Beck really changes the trajectory for the good of the Yardbirds. They really become kind of a psychedelic band as well as a blues band. When their bass player leaves, that's when Jeff Beck invites Jimmy Page to play bass. Bass player returns. They decide to do a two-headed guitar thing. And really, that kind of is a first, not necessarily a first band, but certainly in the British scene, where you have a two-guitar monster band, a quintet, something that bands like Aerosmith and the Allman Brothers would, and Leonard Skinner would kind of perfect, along with bands like Thin Lizzy. The two-guitar attack, and that made a huge impression. They did tours in the United States, and ultimately Jeff Beck, on one of those tours in the United States, just leaves the tour, and then you have Jimmy Page taking over that band. So he's in the band from 66 to 68. During a 65, maybe it's 66, session. They co-write the song Beck's Bolero, which is the B-side of Hi-Ho Silver Linings, which is a single by Jeff Beck, where Jeff Beck sings. Jeff Beck's not much of a singer, but it actually charted for Jeff Beck, and the B-side's Beck's Bolero. Originally, the thought was the band would be Jeff Beck, Jimmy Page, John Entwistle on bass, and Keith Moon on drums. Entwistle did not show up that day, but they got John Paul Jones. And I think Nicky Hopkins showed up as well. I think this is where Keith Moon suggests that this band was going to go over like a Led Zeppelin or a lead balloon. And ultimately, Jimmy stores that away. By 1968, the Yardbirds are crumbling, and that band breaks up. Jimmy Page retains the management of Peter Green, and they recruit his session buddy, John Paul Jones, and they find two guys from the North Country, and John Bonham and Robert Plant, young 19-year-old musicians. And really the rest is history. In that summer of 1968, they record the first album. In 1969, this fantastic record comes out, Led Zeppelin 2. And really, every year for the next almost decade, they put albums out. Jimmy, Robert, John, and John Paul Jones. And then the seminal fourth album, just a self-titled album, Led Zeppelin 4 with Stairway to Heaven. You know, they change rock and roll music forever. And here's the inside of that record. And really become the iconic rock band. And Jimmy Page becomes the iconic frontman. Lead guitar player of not only Led Zeppelin, but really what a rock lead guitar player should be. Charismatic. He experiments with a theremin and a bow during songs like Dazed and Confused. He plays a double neck Gibson like this and wears the dragon suits. It is just, you know, for the teenage me, learning what Led Zeppelin was in the late 80s, he's just as cool as you can be with the cigarette hanging out and the stories of debauchery and the partying. You know, Houses of the Holy is probably my favorite Zeppelin album. I don't have it on vinyl, but that's followed up in 1975 by Physical Graffiti with songs like Kashmir and Down by the Seaside and 10 Years Gone and Wonton Song. You know, these are just iconic records ultimately, and they do iconic touring. You know, the music game, they kind of invented, along with the Rolling Stones, the world tour and the stadium act. You know, when they're starting, Zeppelin's playing theaters and clubs and the Fillmores. And by the end, they're playing football stadiums. And it's really not that long after their inception that they're playing large venues and multiple night stands at the Madison Square Garden and at Forum, playing football stadiums like the Silverdome and breaking records with 92,000 people in attendance. John Bonham unfortunately passes away in 1980. This, coupled with some heavy drug use by Jimmy Page, he, you know, kind of goes into a little bit of a semi-retirement. He does some sessions in early '81 with Chris Squire from Yes and Alan White on drums. So Squire on bass, Alan White on drums. And they wanted to bring in Robert Plant and call it XYZ, X, Yes, X Zeppelin. Plant's not too keen into it. That falls apart. He works with Robert Plant a little bit on the Honey Drippers record, then enters after a tribute concert to Ronnie Lane and the Arms tour for ALS, tribute concerts for Ronnie Lane's ALS and multiple sclerosis, working with Paul Rogers from Bad Company. Bad Company's broken up in 82. By 84, a band with Chris Slade on drums and Tony Franklin on bass, Paul Rogers fronting and guitar, and Jimmy Page. And there's 2 pretty good, firm albums. Songs like Radioactive and All the King's Horses and All the King's Men. Probably my favorite song. Page, then Zeppelin does the Live Aid reunion. They do 3 songs, including Stairway to Heaven and Whole Lotta Love with Phil Collins and Chester Thompson, I believe, on drums. You know, that does not amount into a Zeppelin reunion, even though they did work in early 1986 on some sessions to see if they could get the band back together. You know, ultimately, Page does Outrider proper first solo album in 1988, tours successfully with Jason Bonham on drums, and you know, there's other one-off Zeppelin things like the 1988 Atlantic Records show at Madison Square Garden. In 1992 and 1993, you know, clearly wanting to get the Zeppelin thing. By the late 80s, the Zeppelin reunion rumors are rampant. By the early 90s, you know, he guests at Net Worth in 1990 with Robert Plant on Wearing and Tearing. Robert Plant issues a solo album that has a song called Tall Cool One on it that has some snippets of past Zeppelin stuff. You know, every other day or certainly month, you're hearing and you're hoping that Led Zeppelin will get back together. Well, it doesn't happen, and Page actually goes and does an album with, I don't want to say Robert Plant sound-alike, but you know, Robert Plant became the golden god with the blonde hair and the chest hanging out, and guys like David Coverdale take that on that look, and it's an iconic look, just like people like Joe Perry from Aerosmith take on the Jimmy Page iconic look as their guitar stance, and guys and using the Gibson Les Paul played through a Marshall, not invented by Page, but really kind of perfected by Page. So he does an album called Coverdale Page with David Coverdale and Denny Carmisi on drums. And it's fantastic. I actually had tickets to see them in Memphis in 1993, I think. The tour got canceled. They did do some shows in Japan. Then in 1994, Robert Plant, after being approached to do MTV Unplugged, gets his old buddy Jimmy Page, and they successfully reunite for a couple of great tours in 1995 and 1998 as Page and Plant. They do an album in 1998 called Walking in the Clarksdale, which is okay. I saw them a couple times on the 95 tour, once in Memphis early in the tour, and then the first European show in Paris, and they were great shows filled with Led Zeppelin covers, if you will, and John Paul Jones, upon induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1995, says, "I guess my friends forgot my phone number." By 2000, that band's broken up, and Jimmy Page has spent the rest of the new millennium remastering catalogs, remastering Zeppelin's material. They did do a famous full show in December of 2007 at the O2 in London, and released a DVD called Celebration Day, which is a great way to celebrate the legacy of Led Zeppelin and John Bonham on drums, with Jason Bonham on drums for that evening. They tried to get the band back together. Plant wasn't into it again. They brought in Miles Kennedy from Alter Bridge. They brought in Steven Tyler from Aerosmith. That didn't work out, and really Page, other than a couple of one-offs, playing with Roy Harper, playing with Donovan, playing with Jeff Beck for Jeff Beck's Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction, They haven't done much. You know, I mean, Jimmy Page has not done much, and I'm wishing him a happy 80th birthday. You are a hero of mine. You're the hero of all of us, especially at our age. The guys that didn't get to see Zeppelin. I was fortunate enough to see Jimmy 3 times. I had another chance to see him when he did his tour in 2002 with the Black Crowes. Check out that album live at the Greek Theater. It's fantastic with Page playing Black Crowes songs and old Zeppelin songs. Happy birthday, Jimmy. You're an icon. Happy 80th. Peace out. We'll catch you later. We do shows every day. Subscribe to my channel if you like the content. See you.